"I'm afraid the armories are closed for the day," sneered Major Valemere, staring down his nose at West as though at a beggar whining for small change. "Our quotas are fulfilled ahead of schedule, and we will not be lighting the forges again this week. Perhaps if you had arrived on time—" The pounding in West's head was growing worse than ever. He forced himself to breathe slowly and keep his voice calm and even. There was nothing to be gained by losing his temper. There was never anything to be gained by that. "I understand, Major," said West patiently, "but there is a war on. Many of the levies we have received are scarcely armed, and Lord Marshal Burr has asked that the forges be lit in order to provide equipment for them." This was not entirely true, but since joining the Marshal's staff, West had more or less given up on telling the whole truth to anyone. That was no way to get anything done. He now employed a mixture of wheedling, bluster, and outright lies, humble entreaties and veiled threats, and had become quite expert at judging which tactic would be most effective on what man. Unfortunately, he had yet to strike the right chord with Major Valemere, the master of the king's armories. Somehow, their being equal in rank made matters all the more difficult. He could not quite get away with bullying the man, but could not quite bring himself to beg. Furthermore, in terms of social standing, they were anything but equals. Valemere was old nobility, from a powerful family and arrogant beyond belief. He made Jezal Dan Luther seem a humble, selfless type, and his total lack of experience in the field only made matters worse. He behaved doubly like an ass in order to compensate. Instructions from West, though they might come from Marshal Burr himself, were as welcome as they would have been from a reeking swineherd. Today was no exception. "This month's quotas are fulfilled, Major West." Valemere managed to put a sneering emphasis into the name. "And so the forges are closed. That is all." "And this is what you would have me tell the Lord Marshal?" "The arming of levies is the responsibility of those lords that provide them," he recited primly. "I cannot be blamed if they fall short on their obligations. It is simply not our problem, Major West, and you may tell that to the Lord Marshal." This was always the way of it, back and forth, from Burr's offices to the various commissary departments, to the commanders of companies, of battalions, of regiments, to the stores scattered around the Agriont and the city, to the armories, the barracks, the stables, to the docks, where the soldiers and their equipment would begin to embark in just a few short days, to other departments, and back to where he began, with miles walked and nothing done. Each night he would drop into bed like a stone, only to start up a few hours later with it all to do again. As commander of a battalion, his trade had been to fight the enemy with steel. As a staff officer, it seemed, his role was to fight his own side with paper, more secretary than soldier. He felt like a man trying to push a huge stone up a hill, straining and straining, getting nowhere, but unable to stop pushing, in case the rock should fall and crush him. Meanwhile, arrogant bastards who were in just the same danger lazed on the slopes beside him, saying, "Well, it's not my rock." He understood now why during the war in Gurkel there had sometimes not been enough food for the men to eat, or clothes for them to wear, or wagons to draw the supplies with, or horses to draw the wagons, or all manner of other things that were deeply necessary and easily anticipated. West would be damned before that happened because of some oversight of his, and he would certainly be damned if he would see men die for want of a weapon to fight with. He tried yet again to calm himself, but each time his head hurt more, and his voice was cracking with the effort. "And what if we find ourselves mired in Angland with a crowd of half-clothed, unarmed peasants to provide for? What then, Major Valemere? Whose problem will it be? Not yours, I dare say. You'll still be here with your cold forges for company." West knew as soon as he said it that he had gone too far. The man positively bristled. "How dare you, sir? Are you questioning my personal honour? My family goes back 9 generations in the King's Own." West rubbed his eyes, not knowing whether he wanted to laugh or cry. "I have no doubts as to your courage, I assure you. That was not my meaning at all." He tried to put himself in Valamir's position. He did not really know the pressures the man was under. Probably he would rather be in command of soldiers than smiths. Probably. It was no use. The man was a shit, and West hated him. "This is not a question of your honour, Major, or that of your family. This is a question of our being fit for war." Valamir's eyes had turned deadly cold. "Just who do you think you're talking to, you dirty commoner? All the influence you have you owe to Burr, and who is he but an oaf from the provinces, risen to his rank by fortune alone?" West blinked. He guessed what they said about him behind his back, of course, but it was another thing to hear it to his face. "And when Burr is gone, what will become of you, eh? Where will you be without him to hide behind? You've no blood, no family." Valamir's lips twisted in a cold sneer. "Apart from that sister of yours, of course, and from what I hear—" West found himself moving forward fast. "What?" he snarled. "What was that?" His expression must have been dire indeed. He saw the colour draining from Valamir's face. You think I need Burr to fight my battles, you fucking gutless worm?" Before he knew it, he had moved again, and Valamir stumbled back towards the wall, flinching sideways and raising one arm as if to ward off an expected blow. It was the most West could do to stop his hands from grabbing hold of the little bastard and shaking him until his head came off. His own skull was throbbing, pounding. He felt as though the pressure would pop his eyes right out of his head. He dragged in long, slow breaths through his nose, clenched his fists until they hurt. The anger slowly subsided, back below the point where it threatened to take sudden control of his body. It only pulsed now, squeezing at his chest. "If you have something to say on the subject of my sister," he whispered softly, "then you can say it. Say it now." He let his left hand drop slowly to sit on the hilt of his sword. "And we can settle this outside the city walls." Major Valamir shrank back still further. "I heard nothing," he whispered. "Nothing at all." "Nothing at all." West looked down into his white face for a moment longer, then stepped away. "Now, if you would be so good as to reopen the forges for me, we have a great deal of work to get through." Valamir blinked for a moment. "Of course, I will have them lit at once." West turned on his heel and stalked off, knowing the man was glowering daggers at his back, knowing that he had made yet another bad situation worse. One more high-born enemy among the many. The really galling thing was that the man was right. Without Burr, he was as good as finished. He had no family, apart from that sister of his. Damn it, his head hurt. "Why me?" he hissed to himself. "Why?" There was still a lot to do today, enough for a whole day's work on its own, but West could take no more. His head hurt so badly that he could hardly see. He had to lie down in the dark, with a wet cloth over his face, if only for an hour, if only for a minute. He fumbled in his pocket for his key, his other hand clamped over his aching eyes, his teeth locked together. Then he heard a sound on the other side of the door, a faint clink of glass. Ardee. "No," he hissed to himself. Not now. Why the hell had he ever given her a key? Cursing softly, he raised his fist to knock. Knocking on his own door, that was where he was now. His fist never made it to the wood. A most unpleasant image began to form in the back of his mind. Ardee and Luther, naked and sweaty, writhing around on his carpet. He turned his key swiftly in the lock and shoved the door open. She was standing by the window, alone, and, he was relieved to see, fully dressed. He was less pleased to see her filling a glass right to the brim from the decanter, though. She raised an eyebrow at him as he burst through the door. "Oh, it's you." "Who the hell else would it be?" snapped West. "These are my rooms, aren't they?" "Somebody's not in the best of moods this morning." A bit of wine slopped over the rim of her glass and onto the table. She wiped it up with her hand and sucked her fingers, then took a long swig from the glass for good measure. Her every movement niggled at him. West grimaced and shoved the door shut. "You have to drink so much." "I understand that a young lady should have a beneficial pastime." Her words were careless, as usual, but even through his headache, West could tell there was something strange going on. She kept glancing towards the desk, then she was moving towards it. He got there first, snatched up a piece of paper from the top, one line written on it. "What's this?" "Nothing. Give it me." He held her away with one arm and read it. "The usual place, tomorrow night, A." West's skin prickled with horror. "Nothing? Nothing?" He shook the letter under his sister's nose. Ardee turned away from him, flicking her head as you might at a fly, saying nothing but slurping noisily from her glass. West ground his teeth. "It's Lothar, isn't it?" "I didn't say so." "You didn't have to." The paper crumpled up into a tiny ball in his white-knuckled hand. He half-turned towards the door, every muscle tensed and trembling. It was the most he could do to stop himself dashing out and throttling the little bastard right now, but he was just able to make himself think for a moment. Giselle had let him down, and badly, that ungrateful shit. But it was hardly that shocking. The man was an ass. You keep your wine in a paper bag, you shouldn't be too upset when it leaks. Besides, Giselle wasn't the one writing the letters. What good would stepping on his neck do? There would always be more empty-headed young men in the world. "Just where are you going with this, Ardee?" She sat down on the settle and glared at him frostily over the rim of her glass. "With what, brother?" "You know with what!" "Aren't we family? Can't we be candid with each other? If you have something to say, you can out and say it. Where do you think I'm going?" "I think you're going straight to shit since you ask." He squeezed his voice back down with the greatest of difficulty. "This business with Lothar has gone way too far." "Letters? Letters? I warned him, but it seems he wasn't the problem. What are you thinking? Are you thinking at all? It has to stop before people start to talk." He felt a suffocating tightness in his chest, took a deep breath, but his voice burst out anyway. "They're damn well talking already! It stops now, do you hear me?" "I hear you," she said carelessly. "But who cares what they think?" "I care!" He nearly screamed it. "Do you know how hard I have to work? Do you think I'm a fool? You know what you're about, Ardee!" Her face was turning sullen, but he forged on. "It's not as though this is the first time. Must I remind you, your luck with men has not exactly been the best. Not with the men in my family, at least." She was sitting bolt upright now, face tight and pale with anger. "And what would you know about my luck? We've hardly talked in 10 years. "We're talking now!" shouted West, flinging the crumpled bit of paper across the room. "Have you thought how this might turn out? What if you were to get him? Have you considered that? Would his family be charmed by the blushing bride, do you think? At best, they'd never speak to you. At worst, they'd cut you both off." He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Haven't you noticed he's a vain, arrogant swine? They all are. How would he manage, do you think, without his allowance, without his friends in high places? He wouldn't know where to begin. How could you be happy with each other?" His head was ready to split in half, but he ranted on. "And what happens if, as is far more likely, you can't get him? What then? You'd be finished. Have you thought on that? You've come close enough before, and you're supposed to be the clever one. You're making a laughing stock of yourself." He almost choked on his rage. "Of both of us!" Ardee gave a gasp. "Now we see it," she nearly screamed at him. "No one cares a shit for me, but if your reputation is in danger, you fucking stupid bitch!" The decanter flew spinning across the room. It crashed against the wall not far from Ardee's head, sending fragments of glass flying and wine running down the plaster. It made him more furious. "Why don't you fucking listen?" He was across the room in an instant. Ardee looked surprised, just for a moment, then there was a sharp click, his fist catching her in the face as she got up. She didn't fall far. His hands caught her before she hit the ground, yanked her up, then flung her back against the wall. "You'll be the end of us!" Her head smacked against the plaster, once, twice, 3 times. One hand grabbed hold of her neck. Teeth bared, body crushed her against the wall. A little snort in her throat as the fingers began to squeeze. "You selfish, useless, fucking whore!" Hair was tangled across her face. He could only see a narrow slice of skin, the corner of a mouth, one dark eye. The eye stared back at him, painless, fearless, empty, flat, like a corpse. Squeeze, snort, squeeze, squeeze. West came to his senses with a sickening jolt. The fingers snapped open, he jerked the hand away. His sister stayed upright against the wall. He could hear her breathing, short gasps. Or was that him? His head was splitting. The eye was still staring at him. He must have imagined it. Must have. Any second now he would wake up. The nightmare would be over. A dream. Then she pushed the hair out of her face. Her skin was candle wax, pasty white. The trickle of blood from her nose looked almost black against it. The pink marks stood out vivid on her neck, the marks the fingers made. His fingers. Real, then. West's stomach churned. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the blood on her lip, and he wanted to be sick. Ardee. He was so disgusted he half vomited as he said the word. He could taste the bile at the back of his mouth, but his voice wouldn't stop gurgling away. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Are you all right?" "I've had worse." She reached up slowly and touched her lip with a fingertip. The blood smeared out across her mouth. "Ardee." One hand reached out to her, then he jerked it back, afraid of what it might do. "I'm sorry." He was always sorry. Don't you remember? He'd hold us and cry afterwards. Always sorry. But it never stopped him the next time. Have you forgotten? West gagged, choked back vomit again. If she'd wept and ranted and beat him with her fists, it would have been easier to bear. Anything but this. He tried never to think about it, but he hadn't forgotten. "No," he whispered. "I remember." "Did you think he stopped when you left?" "He got worse. Only then I'd hide on my own. I used to dream that you'd come back and save me. But when you did come back, it wasn't for long, and things weren't the same between us, and you did nothing." "Ardee, I didn't know." "You knew, but you got away. It was easier to do nothing, to pretend. I understand. And do you know, I don't even blame you. It was some kind of comfort back then to know you got away. The day he died was the happiest of my life. He was our father. Oh, yes. My bad luck. Bad luck with men. I cried at the grave like a dutiful daughter. Cried and cried until the mourners feared for my reason. Then I lay in bed awake until everyone was sleeping. I crept out of the house. I went back to the grave. I stood a while looking down. Then I fucking pissed on it. I pulled up my shift and I squatted down and I pissed on him. And all the while I was thinking, I'll be nobody's dog anymore. She wiped the blood from her nose on the back of her hand. "You should have seen how happy I was when you sent for me. I read the letter over and over. The pathetic little dreams all came alive again. Hope, eh? What a fucking curse. Off to live with my brother, my protector. He'll look out for me, he'll help me. Now maybe I can have a life. But I find you different than I remembered. All grown up. First you ignore me, then you lecture me, then you hit me. And now you're sorry. Truly your father's son." He groaned. It was as if she was sticking a needle in him right in his skull. Less than he deserved. She was right. He had failed her, long before today. While he had been playing with swords and kissing the asses of people who despised him, she had been suffering. A little effort was all it would have taken, but he could never face it. Every minute he had spent with her, he felt the guilt, like a rock in his gut, weighing him down, unbearable. She stepped away from the wall. "Perhaps I'll go and pay a call on Giselle. He may be the shallowest idiot in the whole city, but I don't think he'd ever raise a hand to me, do you?" She pushed him out of the way and made for the door. "Ardee!" He caught hold of her arm. "Please, Ardee, I'm sorry." She stuck her tongue out, curled it into a tube, and blew bloody spit through it. It splattered softly down the front of his uniform. "That's for your sorry, bastard." The door banged shut in his face.